notice about that. There we go. And nice to see some familiar faces. I'm going to open with karakia and then we will do some introductions. Bear with me while I control my slides. I'll just open and explain our karakia after I've said it. Whakatakati hau ki te uru, whakatakati hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, e hiaki ana, te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora. So kia ora everyone and welcome along to this very special session today. I'm Tara Fagan, I'm Chair of TPTMT AMaGA, the Association of Educators Beyond the Classroom here in New Zealand. And this is a special session because today we've joined with the Australian Museums and Galleries Association in Australia. So they have an education network as well, although a bit like TPTMT AMaGA, as I understand it, it's having a little quiet moment at the moment. And we thought it was a good opportunity to come together and share curriculum and also have a discussion about some of the things that are happening for us in our sectors, because we're a very closely linked set of countries. And it's nice to be able to share and talk about where we are. So I see that some people have started introducing themselves in the chat. Kia ora, Megan and Elaine, thank you for putting that in. Feel free to jump in to the chat and introduce yourselves so we get a sense of who's here. And you might also like to put the country that you're in, so that if you're coming in from Australia, or you know that we're coming in from New Zealand. So today I'd like to firstly welcome our first guest speaker, George Perkins. George is the Acting Education and Public Program Officer for the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery in Tasmania. George will introduce themselves very shortly. We've also got Laura Jones, who will be joining us hopefully very soon. Laura is our Senior Learning Specialist here at Te Papa Tongarewa. Laura is unwell, but she said she'll come in. So if not, you're going to hear me talk about curriculum, but hopefully Laura will make it. So George, I'll hand over to you. You might like to introduce yourself and perhaps you could start talking about curriculum. The way we're going to structure this for those of you that have joined us is that we will do a presentation from each country about curriculum with a focus on histories, and then we're just going to open up the mic and talk about how we find things in our sector. So kia ora, George, over to you.
Hi everyone, so my name is George, coming through to you from Launceston, so Stony Creek Nation, that's our local Aboriginal area. So I'm basically just going to share my screen in a minute. I've got a little presentation just to kind of highlight our new Australian curriculum, which is being implemented this year. So it's very sort of, I guess, new. Most teachers need to be rolling it out by the end of the year, is my understanding. So I'll just pop it up and we'll go from there.
You can come back, but if not, I'll just say no.
Okay. I don't know how long it'll be for. Yeah.
We might just ask those of you that are joining us, if you could just mute now. We'll have time to have mics switched on after George's and Laura's presentations. Kia ora.
Cool. So the latest curriculum, so foundation to year 10. So this is kindergarten. I'm not actually, I realise I don't know what the New Zealand school ages are, but in Australia, so kindergarten starts the year that you turn 5. And then year 10 is usually the year that you're turning 16. And then years 11 and 12, that separates off into, I guess, a different kind of set of the curriculum, very much based on pre-tertiary and non-pre-tertiary, so university, I guess, entrance kind of classes, etc. So I'm just going to focus on the K to 10 in this one. So the general capabilities cover across all of curriculum, across all subject areas, across all year levels. And then within that, we also have some new, well, not new, but cross-curriculum priorities, which have, I guess, links across all subject areas, grade levels, across the curriculum as well. So these ones, I won't go into too much detail with these, but that probably will crop up a little bit across the next couple of slides. So I'm going to start out with the primary school HAS, which is History and Social Sciences. These are the kinds of, I guess, there's been some changes from the previous one, particularly across the history curriculum, where there's been a lot of refining of curriculum, or there's been additions from to expand on different curriculum areas, or kind of condensing of different things. So there's a lot to cover, so I'm not going to cover it all, but it's quite comprehensive across on the Australian curriculum website if anyone's interested. So at I guess this level, the questioning, researching, interpreting, analysing and evaluating, concluding and decision making and communicating, within each of those there's sort of 2 or 3 different curriculum links that will cover different learning focus areas that relate back to the general capabilities as well as the cross-curriculum priorities. So in primary school, yeah.
Excuse me, I'm just going to jump in now. There's a couple of comments in the comments saying that the slides on their screen aren't changing. So
okay.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that, and I'm just going to signal a welcome to Laura. Laura, George is doing setting up the presentation, and then we'll come to you. I might start with the curriculum and then hand over to you, just so you know what's happening. Anyway, George, I will leave it back to you.
Yep, that's all right. If I do it like this, is that better? Can you
I saw the change in slides. I'm just seeing if anyone can put in the chat if it worked for them. Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
So just to recap quickly then, so this was the general capabilities that I was talking about. And so that would probably make much more sense to the words I was saying before. Then we've got our cross-curriculum priorities. So I'll let you have a quick read of those. And then jumping into the primary level HAS. So this is the foundation to year 6. And so I've just dug a little deeper in the primary levels here. So this is with the current version 9 curriculum. So the key themes that seem to crop up certainly in early primary school is very much the students being able to relate their own experiences to history, to thinking about, you know, a couple of generations back, how their lives were different and how the world around them was different. And then as we get through to the year 3s and 4s, we start to look a little bit more about, I guess, the events that occurred to become the place that we now know, and going a little bit deeper into civics and citizenship. And then when we get to grade 5 and 6, we also add in economics and business. And this then comes into some, I guess, more deeper into the Australian government side of things. So this seems to be definitely more thematic rather than event-based. And then once we jump into the high school, I've just broken it down here. This is where we hit the kind of a very event-specific breakdowns from year 7 through to 10. So I can't pull it up because otherwise it'll on my screen, but the kind of comparisons from the previous curriculum, there's been a huge amount taken out from that year 9 and 10 period. There was a whole big section on, I think, the Black Plague for a long time, so they've taken that out. And it seems that there's more emphasis, I suppose, on history within a global context. So the post-World War II, we're not looking at specific events post-World War II. It's much more, I guess, broad in terms of thinking about different themes. So it sort of comes back to the thematic side of things only really in year 10. And what else? There was something else I was going to mention. I can't remember now, but it might come back to me. Then, so jumping into the visual arts. The visual arts curriculum is a lot more broad in terms of there's no specific reference, I suppose, to particular art movements or techniques or themes, artists, that sort of thing. It's very much about students developing their own practice and understanding, I guess, the intention and the why behind why they would do the work that they do. So I imagine that would be much more up to the teachers to develop their kind of lines of inquiry, compared to within the history curriculum where it's very set out specific to these subject areas of what we need to focus on. And there's a very strong focus on First Nations throughout all year levels. That's both looking at First Nations art as well as delving into a little bit into concepts such as intellectual property and the kind of different considerations that to be respectful of culture and things like that as well. And then when we jump into the science side of things, these are I guess the 4 main focuses throughout all of curriculum. The biological, earth and space, physical and chemical sciences. A couple of years through primary school, they'll only have 2 or 3 of those. So I think it's years 1 and 2, they don't have the earth science. And then in year 3, they have the earth science, but they won't have the biology. So there are some crossovers. So there's certain year levels that will have the same or very, very similar wording and expected outcomes. And that's the same with the visual arts, actually. So years 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 are pretty much identical across most of their things. And then there's also a fairly big chunk of the science curriculum focused on human endeavour. So that's everything from, I guess, looking at what humans have done in the science world, but also then students developing their own science practice, I suppose we could call it, developing hypotheses and carrying out experiments and things, which leads into the inquiry line of kind of the more self-directed asking questions and finding answers. So that's sort of, I guess, the best broad overview I can give without going into too much crazy detail for the Australian curriculum. But there's some really good comparative documents on the Australian curriculum website from our old curriculum to the new one. So if anyone's interested in that, I think
that's great, fantastic. Thank you, George. A really good overview. And as you were talking, particularly about the histories, I saw some really alignments with the way that our histories curriculums come into it, which I know Laura will talk about shortly. Laura, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's come in. I was reading through the chat while George was talking, and it's lovely to see we've got a good balance from across both New Zealand and Australia. And so I want to acknowledge everyone who's come in today. I'm just going to start before I hand over to Laura, just give a very quick overview of our curriculum documents, so you've got a sense of where it's situated and located, and Laura will take us deeper into Aotearoa New Zealand History's curriculum, and then we're just going to open the floor because everyone will have their own aspects that they want to contribute around what we're talking about, but also it would be a great opportunity to share how we're finding education and across our countries when you're working in our sector. So I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me for a moment while I just bring up my slides. I haven't got many of them, so but I just thought it might be helpful as you see our curriculum. So in New Zealand, we have 3 key curriculum documents. The first one that you see there is Te Whāriki. So that's for our early childhood students. So George was talking about students in Australia starting school the year they turn 5. In New Zealand, early childhood can go from 0 to 6 years of age, but the predominant age for starting school is 5. So that's the youngest you can start school. And generally most students start that. We've just had a change to how students start. They used to be able to, as soon as they turn 5, start school. Now they're working through in cohorts. So Te Whāriki is a very holistic early childhood curriculum. It has been around now for, gosh, 26, 27 years. And it looks at what our youngest babies through to 5 or 6 years of age need to support them in their next transition through to school. So it focuses on well-being, communication, contribution, aspects like that work through. And our early childhood teachers work to develop plans for the young people. The next curriculum you can see on screen is the current New Zealand curriculum. It is going through a bit of a change at the moment, but that's our curriculum that guides our formal school base from when students enter school at the age of 5 or 6, through to when they leave school, which can be at year 13 when you're, depending on when you started, 17 or 18 years of age. So it's quite a thorough curriculum. It's driven by key competencies and has an overarching vision for guiding education New Zealand. And then the final curriculum that you can see there, Te Marotanga o Aotearoa, is our curriculum. So in New Zealand, we have kura kaupapa and kura iwi, Māori immersion schools, where for our Australian audience, I'll try and explain this the best I can, where our Indigenous Māori population can learn in the context of what they know best. And the Maro isn't a translation of the New Zealand curriculum. It has a different framework and a different way of which it aligns, but it has clear progressions for our young people to follow. So some of our students go to Māori immersion schools, kura kaupapa, and it's an exceptional environment for those students and have very, very good results. In New Zealand at the moment, we are going through a curriculum refresh. So I'm not going to talk too much about this, but we are going, the New Zealand curriculum is evolving to Te Mātai Aho, and this is the overarching sort of diagram that sits underneath it. So it's still very much linked to subject-based areas or discipline areas. But before we get there, we have a real connection. It's about creating a foundation and connecting to place and community. So we can see our cultural and heritage spaces very much sitting in that area. And it's about designing the school curriculum with your community. So you've got schools have some guidance on what they need to teach, but they work with the communities to determine what the most important of those are and the slants that go on that. With our new curriculum, Te Mātai Aho, there was also a group of young people who fed into about what they wanted to learn. So Mātai Tipu, that vision for young people, has come strongly from a group of young people, a very diverse group, who work together with the experts to start to say, this is actually what we want to learn throughout our time at school. So I won't spend too much time on that because it is still in draft form, although being finalised fairly shortly. But Laura, I'm going to hand over to you now, and I think Laura's just gone to get a drink of water, so I will just introduce Laura. Laura is our Senior Learning Specialist here at Te Papa Tongarewa. Laura's been with us for, I think it's over 7 years now at Te Papa. She's got a history background, but a valued member of our team. So Laura, you look as though you're ready to go. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand over to you to introduce yourself properly, but also to talk a little bit more about our social sciences and history curriculum.
Kia ora, Tara, and kia ora koutou, and just a word. If I'm sounding particularly kind of throaty, it's because I'm not very well at the moment. And Tara had the great idea that I just come home actually and talk to you from here, which is a good idea because I'll probably just go to bed after this. But it's really lovely. I think what a nice opportunity to speak with people from across the Tasman and really kind of like talk about synergies between our two curriculums and differences too. Tara, I haven't actually got any slides prepped, so I don't know if you've got anything to do with the histories, but I can just carry on talking about it. So the new histories curriculum was introduced last year as part of a big curriculum refresh that's ongoing within Aotearoa. It started with digital technologies. History came online next. Last year was the year when it was kind of being introduced, if you like, to schools. And then this year it's meant to be embedded within schools, although of course, you know, yes, that's true for many schools, but maybe not for all. And then there's an ongoing rollout. The next subject being rolled out is social sciences. And really our histories curriculum is it's quite a radical document, I'm going to call it, because it really does begin, kia ora. It really does ask schools and kaiako teachers within those schools to start really considering the histories of a colonized country like Aotearoa. And I know obviously Australia is one too. And in what I mean by that is it asks people to actually really reflect on what it means to be a colonized country, to look at colonization, to look at power, to look at where power has been, there's been power imbalance, and also to just really kind of restate what we all know, but needs to be restated. And that is that Māori are the foundational and continuous peoples of this land. And so that's a very, very strong kind of element within the document too. And in fact, what we have are some big ideas, and they're called the understand section of the curriculum, and they are the big ideas. So those big ideas are colonization, to do with colonization, to do with power, to do with Māori being as I said, the foundational and continuous people within this land. And the last one is relationships and connections. I'm just reading from the document. I always forget the wording for this one, but the relationships and connections between people and across boundaries have shaped the course of Aotearoa New Zealand's history. So thank you for that, Tara, that's great. So those, where you see that sort of top blue line, understand the big ideas, there are 4 big ideas, and those are the ones I mentioned. Now, the no part is to do with the contexts, and so those contexts are culture and identity, government and organisation, place and environment, and economic activity. And then the do part is really the kind of like the elements of historical inquiry that you would introduce within your classroom. So they're to do with identifying and exploring historical relationships, identifying sources and perspectives, and that one's really crucial because, of course, when you're identifying perspectives or sources and perspectives, you've also got to then consider whose perspectives are missing, and then interpreting past experiences, decisions, and actions. So the idea behind the curriculum is that those 3 strands, understand, know, and do, are interwoven. So you can see in that graphic that they're interwoven, but that graphic is not just a sort of pretty kind of design. It's actually meant to really indicate how we teach histories within this country, and the idea that they interweave, they come back on each other, and that they all interconnect. What's ideal is that if a teacher sort of selects a kind of meaningful topic, that they ensure that you've got all of the big ideas weaving through that topic. So don't just choose one of the big ideas and think, oh, this topic will cover that one big idea. You know, the idea is that we go broad and we go deep. And then, of course, with the know and the do, then you're bringing in those kind of contexts and those ways of talking about histories. So the teachers are really charged with kind of really selecting meaningful topics to begin with, topics that will really engage students. And there's also a part of this curriculum which says to schools, start local, start where you are. So consider your locality, consider the land around you, consider maybe monuments that are on that land, consider the rivers and the stories and the names of the rivers. Obviously Māori will have particular names, and those are often come with stories to accompany them. And to look at maybe some core historical events and how they impacted you in your environment. We have something called the Treaty of Waitangi within this country, which was a treaty that was signed in 1840. And there are all sorts of issues around the language it was written in and who signed what treaty, but often it's not necessarily taught in a very engaging way. So now teachers are being charged with thinking about the treaty as it impacted on your local community. So looking at the iwi, which is the Māori tribal group, and whether they signed the treaty or not, and what were the arguments for and against, and just placing a local context really around these kind of national events, so that the learning becomes a lot more meaningful to the community. Does anyone want to, Tara, do you want to kind of like come in and at any point with me talking about this and tell me if I've forgotten something, because I will have done.
I think probably the main point to make is that, and I don't know how it is in Australia for our colleagues there, but in New Zealand, it really hasn't been a formal part of our curriculum before. So teachers could teach it under the social science, but it wasn't something that was woven through the curriculum. So for a lot of our teachers, we are learning our history as we're needing to teach it. And that's quite scary for many of the teachers out there, because there's a lot of learning to do. There's a lot of inaccuracies in our history that we need to address. Many of us have grown up with infactual stories that are true or not true. And it's also knowing whose story it is to tell. So I think the biggest challenge facing our teachers in the classroom with this curriculum is knowing how to access professional learning and how to support. And we see cultural and heritage spaces and museums having a role to play in that. The funding doesn't sit alongside that, unfortunately, but people are wanting to know about local history, and where do you start if you've never engaged in that? So I think that's probably the key point that I would make, that it's very scary for a lot of our teachers who are teaching new content while all the curriculum areas are being refreshed. Topics like literacy, like maths, science, are not going to change hugely. Histories is something new altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just sort of add to that possibly something that's quite unusual for us in comparison with Australia is that there's not content is not a part of the curriculum in the sense that you have to teach a certain aspect of history. So you can choose your topic as long as it's meaningful, as long as it interweaves those big ideas. Then you can do that. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. I come from the UK, where content is definitely a much stronger part of the curriculum. So it's in many ways it's a much more liberal curriculum here. Although there was I think part of the reason for the refresh is that there was a concern that because it was very open and if you like, liberal and open to interpretation, that meant that it was somewhat patchy in terms of how it was interpreted. And so many schools are doing great work and other schools less so. So I think this is an attempt from the government to ensure that history is taught in a very kind of meaningful way and an engaging way. Yeah. So I'll probably just leave it there, and I just wonder if anybody has any kind of thoughts or questions, or in comparison with between the two countries. It'd be interesting to think about that.
So please feel free to take the mic. You can either add to the discussions about the different curriculum or ask questions. We've got Laura representing Aotearoa New Zealand and George with Australia, but we also know there's other experts in the area, sitting in the room. So feel free to take the mic. If you don't want to take the mic, feel free to put something in the chat and I will read that out. So it's over to you now. We'll start with the curriculum and then perhaps move on to any challenges or what we're finding exciting about being in our sector at the moment. George, over to you.
I think it's quite interesting what Laura, you were saying about the difference between, I guess, the British curriculum being very structured and compared to the openness, I guess, of the New Zealand curriculum, and comparing that to the fact that the Australian curriculum within history is that, I guess, that rigid part, but the visual arts is not. So I'm wondering, is it across the New Zealand curriculum, is it fairly broad or open for lines of inquiry across all subject areas?
I'm not actually sure about how it works, because I'm thinking that with science, you'd imagine there must be some core bits of content that have to be taught. So I imagine that it depends. It's very much dependent upon the subject area. But I'm not a science expert. But I do, the content-driven approach in the UK has led to its own problems, of course. And so there's no, I don't think there's I mean, I think the openness of the curriculum here is much more attractive and appealing, but you know, some sense of the, you know, guarantee that big important areas of the country's histories are being talked about is it's really, really important, definitely. But yeah, it's a good point. I'm pretty sure in science there must be more kind of content elements.
There are, and as our students get into senior secondary, their assessment, their exams, which lead into our formal qualifications, certainly require certain knowledge base, but each year level has a set of outcomes that students will have learnt, and that's what's assessed against. But again, community can feed into what elements of those are important. Would anyone?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, interestingly, with regard to art, your art curriculum looks very open, as you were saying, George. Ours is pretty open as well. You know, media and processes, for example, will be one standard, and within that you can talk about lots and lots of different kind of artists, of course. But there are also some kind of areas of kind of content which are recommended to study. So I feel like your art curriculum may be more open actually than ours at the moment.
Anyone else want to jump in and add either to that conversation or talk about aspects of the curriculum? Now I can see that just come into the chat now. Elaine from Waikato Museum. It's always lovely to see your face, Elaine. So Elaine says that our curriculum was designed to focus on learning, to learn rather than a set of facts. That's a good point, etc. That students were taught how to explore, discover, respond to information, be critical. I'm going to add to this, Elaine, critical thinkers in that as well. So it's been quite a change for our teachers. Thank you for sharing that, Elaine. I don't know whether you want to take the mic and add to that, or just happy to leave that. Kia ora. So that Anna.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to jump in there with one comment that's reflected in the Australian curriculum as well as the New Zealand curriculum, which was in the history curriculum, there are some new areas such as deep time, which is an area that a lot of teachers are unfamiliar with and I think are a bit nervous about teaching. And I can't remember which point it was in particular, but you mentioned, Laura, I think you mentioned that teachers are feeling a little bit daunted about teaching certain areas of your new history curriculum. So I think that's sort of something that we've been working on here to sort of try and work out how we can help teachers to get there, but it is similarly a very big task for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a very similar feeling here that yeah, I'm really interested in the idea of deep time, because of course I know nothing about it. So is this the first time that it's become a strong part of the curriculum over there?
George, you might have more information on this, but from my understanding is that it is the first time that it will be part of the curriculum.
Yeah, I'm very much new to, I'm not 100% sure on the old curriculum. I've actually just pulled up the bit where it is on the website. I'll pop it in the chat if anyone wants to have a, oh, that's a big link, apologies, have a read. If I'm very curious about this. I'm happy to pull it up if anyone else wants me to.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because it's hard when we're talking about curriculum, because I think we could each spend a whole week on each curriculum in itself, but it's great to get a gaze from that. But I am very interested in the deep time. So if you've got it handy, George, and can share, that would be fantastic.
There's a document. I just got to.
While George is looking for that, yeah, go ahead, Anna.
Sorry, I was just going to add, I think another reason, sort of, I guess, a little bit more specifically as to why why history teachers are feeling a little bit nervous about deep time is that it's actually part of the Year 7 history curriculum. So year 7 here, students would be sort of 12, 13 years old. I think a lot of history teachers feel that it would be, I don't know about easier, but maybe more suited to a year 11 or sort of more senior students. So I think that's one thing that sort of is a bit challenging for teachers in terms of how to take this very big topic and make it accessible to younger students.
So
Yeah, George.
I've just found the comparative document. The previous version of the curriculum, so I don't know what this looked like previous to this version, like going back further. But it's branched out from a single curriculum, which was the theory that people moved out of Africa around 6000 BC and migrated to other parts of the world, including Australia, into 6 different strands within that. So, and all bar one have a fairly strong focus on First Nations. And the first one, the one that doesn't, is just kind of that overview of theories and historical interpretations about early human evolution and migration. And then there's also a refined one that kind of elaborates on some topics regarding significant heritage sites, ancestral remains, and material culture and artifacts. So it seems, yeah, quite comprehensive compared to the previous version. Yeah.
Thanks for looking at that, George. And I see Kate's put in the chat that Aboriginal Education Services in Tasmania have been running quite a bit of deep time PD too. So, yeah, it's interesting. I often wonder when teachers, and this is just personal reflection, not anything that I know to be true, but when our curriculum, history was first introduced here, and colonisation and power is one of the big topics. A lot of teachers, and it starts from school entry onwards where teachers are teaching this, and a lot of teachers said, oh, look, we can't teach this. It's much more suited to a secondary audience rather than our new entrants, our 5 and 6 year olds coming through. Every year builds on something. It doesn't mean you need to, colonialism can be introduced very subtly, well, not even subtly. It can be introduced at those young years and built on so that students progress their understanding as they go through. So I often wonder if teachers feel sometimes things need to be taught because they're thinking of the bigger picture, the end result, and thinking how complex that is and what level of skill set and critical thinking you need to do to unpack those meanings, whereas that subtle introduction could be something. But then again, deep time, when I think about Aboriginal education, could have a whole different meaning.
Yeah, just to add to that, Tara, it's an important point to make that when we're talking about those big ideas, that diagram I showed you earlier, that we showed you, the woven understand, know, do ideas, that does go from year 1 until, and it goes up until year 10. So this curriculum is quite radical. It is asking for teachers to be adopting these kind of ideas very early on, but we often break it down when we're delivering our the workshops that we've been involved in, which are workshops around the new histories curriculum. We often break it down with teachers and say, look, actually teaching colonization as a construct is a massive deal. But if you can break it down into colonizing behaviors and looking for examples of colonizing behaviors, and so that's kind of how we make it feel doable, I suppose. One question I wanted to ask you was, in terms of deep time, how is this resonating within the kind of like Australian public, shall we say? How is everybody responding to this shift in your curriculum?
I probably can't really speak to that, but I'm not sure if there's any other Australians that might be able to.
It's Kate here. Sorry, I put my video on. Can you hear me? Oh no, my camera's
Yes.
not on, is it?
I can hear
Yes, we
you.
can hear
I
you.
can hear me. It helps if I plug my camera in. Was that question around the deep time specifically?
Yeah, I just wondered
Yeah.
how, with the integration of Indigenous ways of knowing, how is that resonating within the wider community?
It's early days.
Yeah.
Very much so. That's when I just put that post about Aboriginal Education Services. They've been running a lot of deep time PD because there is a great need, because teachers, it's quite, I've quite a struggle to actually, and so we're talking about megafauna as well as ancient cultural practice. So that and they're doing a good job, but it's a very different way for teachers to get their heads around things. And then being in a museum context, that presents another challenge again, because those how can I put it? Topics are held in very different parts of the museum. So it's quite challenging for us and for teachers to try and use the museum to program that together. Is that clear?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's to try and connect all those things, because we keep in our museum, and I think with you in Lonnie, our galleries are quite sort of independent to other areas of deep time.
And I'm imagining that deep time has because you're such a vast country, and that within deep time will resonate differently in different parts of the country with different peoples. Yeah.
It's not abstract, but there is an abstract quality, I think, which is and we're talking about quite a long time.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yes.
And that's, there's so much I could probably talk about that. They're trying to get that balance, because of the last 200 years of invasion, colonization, and then balancing that with, 60,000 years. I think we all have that struggle, perhaps.
Yeah.
But, and I think your point earlier that teachers are learning as they're trying to teach, that's really, really very poignant around this. I've put another post in there about sort of colonialism we're finding with our Aboriginal learning facilitators. They're talking to students that don't understand almost why we speak English here. So it means when they're then trying to come in and talk about past and present Tasmanian Aboriginal culture, they've got to kind of rewind all the way back to understanding.
Yeah.
So that's where the curriculum, I find, can make our job quite hard. And because it doesn't align with how we're trying to work as a museum. And
if I might add to that point as well, if you go back into the year 1, 2, and 3 history curriculum, so in the primary school, everything that looks at First Nations is all in relation to colonial, events and the kind of the intersection between those. So there's certainly not in a specific way reference to time before the colonial impacts on those communities. So taking it out of that lens, I think, as well, is also very difficult when that's how everything else is taught leading up until that deep time point.
That's really interesting, and it leads nicely on to the next question with the 15 minutes that we've got left together, is what are our spaces each doing to support that? Support the understanding of deep time, to support the understanding of the histories in your curriculum, whether you're in Australia or New Zealand. What sort of things, how can we help teachers, and in what ways are we doing that?
Me again. Oh, sorry, Elaine. Good. Elaine just waved. I'm going off again.
Waikato Museum has got a real focus on our local curriculum or our local story. That's what we're trying to tell. So we've shifted away from a very broad national overview of what culture and history is, and really focusing on our story and the the development of our Hamilton, the Waikato region, with the arrival of the Tainui, and things like that. So, and then even more local. So part of our exhibition is focused on the immediate centre where the museum is and where a lot of our local schools come from. So, and even within that region, there are 5 hapu sort of Māori groups within that region. So it's trying to tell each of those stories. So I think the idea is at the moment we're going to take one group at a time and focus on that for 6 months, and then take another group and their stories, because they are individual groups but have a united story as well. So we're we're really privileged to be able to tell the local story, so that we're getting an awful lot of visitors of our local schools coming in, because we do hold that, and we're trying to tell it as honestly and with a Te Ao Māori viewpoint, of the local tribe. So Cassandra might be able to add something to that if she would like.
Kia ora. Kia ora, everybody. And yes, thank Elaine. I'm just the new educator here at the Waikato Museum. So very much just still learning the ropes and figuring out how we do things. But I've come from an art and Māori art tertiary education background. And one thing that I'm finding really interesting and really just haven't worked out yet, I guess, is that within teaching Māori art, there's a real emphasis on, for example, if you have po that you're speaking to for kairo carvings, you name them, you do karakia. There's a range of things that are just expected that you would do if you're going to talk about those po in an art context. But then here in the museum, we have po, and we tell their stories to a whole range of students without necessarily knowing if these po are ancestors of those students or any of those students. And I have a lot of discomfort around what is the right way for me to tell these stories, that some of them are my stories. I have an tupuna in some of these po, and so I tend to focus on the ones that I have a whakapapa connection to. But there are many more here than that. And so I just have these questions about whether we should even be telling the stories. You know, there's this phrase, nothing about us without us, used by Indigenous peoples. And yet when we come in and start teaching their histories now, because now the curriculum is asking it of us, and that's a good thing. However, sometimes I worry that there's still an objectifying tone that is part of that sort of anthropological inheritance. And I wonder how are we being supported within this new curriculum to really actually bring a completely different perspective to how we tell the stories. It's very complex, yeah.
Kia ora, Cassandra. That's really interesting. And I'm going to bring in that C word again, colonization, because of course museums are colonial institutions. And I think that's partly what you're maybe getting at, is that of course, you know, we have an inheritance, we have a burdened inheritance really of just grabbing things and collecting and classifying and, you know, putting them in boxes and with a label and etc. And, you know, this is a conversation that people are having all around the world, I know, but it's definitely something that within colonized countries, actually, to be honest, within colonizer countries, if you think about the British Museum, what's happening there, you know, it's a big, ripe conversation. And I think you're absolutely right to bring it up. We have a whare whakairo, it's a beautiful carved meeting house, Te Hauki Tuaranga, within Te Papa. And it was actually stolen. It was actually taken from Rongofkata and iwi on the east coast. And we have it within our walls. Now, the Treaty of Waitangi has, you know, there's a whole treaty process. You can, you know, make claims about what has happened, you know, in terms of past grievances. And so Rongofkata complained right from the get-go that when Taoki Turinga was stolen, which was like 1850s or something, it was after the treaty was signed anyway. Rongofukata have been asking ever since then for their whare back. And a whare whakairo, by the way, just a carved meeting house, is like it's the heart and soul of your community. So it's not just a pretty building, you know, it has so much more resonance than that. And it's very interesting that Te Papa has this whare. It may well go back to Gisborne Turinganui, where it comes from, but in the meantime, it's been very museumified, and it's got you know, lighting in certainly, and it's kind of like it's you can't actually go into it anymore. You used to be able to. But it occupies a very strange space, and that is it actually, we use it as a focus for conversation within Te Papa as the learning team, because we actually really shine a light on the fact that it was stolen. And it's quite interesting to observe how people react to that. They're genuinely very shocked and horrified and can't believe it. And children, of course, who have an innate sense of justice and injustice feel this very keenly. So it is interesting. I think it is possible to be very critical of our collections, and to actually be critical with the audience, and in order to get the audience to reflect on what we do as a museum and where we work. And what can we do better? You know, because there are many examples of behaviours which are a lot better. And but it's very interesting that you bring that up, actually, Cassandra. It kind of resonates with me as well. And I'm sure that must happen in Australia too. Hey.
I think that was a point that was brought up at one of the keynote speakers at the AMaGA conference, was that we're all really well intentioned in wanting to tell the stories and to support the, I guess, the Indigenous community in our respective countries, to be able to kind of keep that happening. But at what point are we either creating more work for those groups, or are we doing things that are, you know, not kind of, I guess, I don't know what the right word is, useful, respectful, or in a way that is, you know, yeah, doing things the right way, I suppose. So it's sort of, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if anyone really knows what the answer is yet, do they?
No, I think it's about the time that's needed, the time that we need to allow for these things to evolve, and for us to know the right ways of managing things, because we don't want to cause any more damage than what has already been done.
I just wanted to talk about briefly an exhibition that we've recently had called Taipani Milatina 2, Return to Country. And it was a big exhibition that got extended at TMAG, Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery. And it was about returned objects and repatriation. So it's completely, you know, when you have exhibitions like that to work with, I mean, it's changed everything. Even though it's now closed, I mean, the actual, the theme, it's still actually continuing, because those returned objects have come, they're not returned, they're on loan. You know, they've come from the British Museum. We've got them from over Australia and America and all sorts of places. So it's really helped us to completely start talking about this whole, you know, because people, as you said, just don't get it. You know, don't know what's happened, and that these cultural treasures have been stolen most of the time, and or certainly removed without people understanding what was happening. So yeah, to have that, I mean, as we all work in I think we all work in cultural institutions, you know, it does, when you have curators that help our learning programs by providing those opportunities, yeah, it's wonderful. And we're missing it. We're really missing it now, because that dialogue has kind of gone. In the sense that there's not an exhibition to go around and look at. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
We've got just 5 minutes left and we're getting on to some pretty deep subject areas, which is amazing because that's what happens when groups like us come together. You know, none of these are going to be solved overnight, but it's great to be able to talk about it. Andrew, you look as though you've got something to contribute there. Am I just mistaking that?
Yeah,
your
no.
camera turned on?
I just turned my camera on for that reason, because I was thinking, when the other thing within the Australian curriculum in the capabilities is this notion of ethical understanding. And I think that what we've just been talking about now is absolutely a brilliant jumping off point for dealing with ethical understanding. And so that idea of museums being capable of reparation, of making a difference, of acting ethically as well. I think, you know, in a sense, that's more, you know, we were talking about deep time. This is about deep learning, in a sense. It's about how you layer on top of the history and the idea of something being stolen and so on, that idea of what it means and what you can do about it and what the best options are and how that plays out. You know, and these are brilliant contexts for those kinds of discussions.
Good, thank you. Now we've just got 4 minutes left. Would anyone like to add to any of the korero, the discussion that we're having?
I just wanted to add a little bit to what Andrew said. I completely agree. And I think with reference to the carved meeting house I was talking about, Aotearoa, which was stolen, it is a really great example of using aspects of your museum, being critical around them, but actually also it's a wonderful illustration. I mean, tangible illustration of colonizing behaviors, which can be kind of super useful. It's also within a New Zealand context, a really great example of where the Treaty of Waitangi is acting in the real world in terms of making reparations for iwi that have had wrongs done to them, and so actually sometimes it can be, you can struggle to find ways to illustrate things, and actually this one example actually illustrates two really massive things for us. And it also, I think it's, in general, there's a bigger context around this, which is around the critical thinking. And what we're doing is we are allowing students who are frankly quite surprised that we're critical about things within our own museum, but we're allowing them, then we're opening up that space for them to be critical too. And I think that's really, really important.
On that note, I'm just going to bring us to a close, because I agree with that discussion on where it's going and the ways in which we can help support teachers. I think our spaces now more than ever, and certainly is the case in New Zealand, and it's sounding like it's the case in Australia as well, are so vital to helping our teachers and our young people understand the histories and understand how to explore the learning that through Tonga, through the treasures that we care for, through the stories that we look after. And sometimes those stories aren't ours to tell, but being able to engage with that context is crucial, and our spaces are crucially important to be able to do that. Now, we are just 1 minute away from closing, and I hate to bring it back to time. I was at a session today, an amazing session, but they talked about time being a colonialised notion, and I appreciate that is very much what I'm doing here, keeping us to time and being very colonial in my approach. But we do need to have a start time and a finish time, because while it's the end of day here in New Zealand, I know from our Australian colleagues, it's a range of different times right across the country there. So I don't want to keep you from the work. I hope this has been useful, and I hope that this is the first of many sessions. So perhaps you could just put in the chat if you'd like us to have a follow-up session, because one of the things we haven't got, well, we have touched upon, haven't really got to talk about, is whether of how we can help support teachers in ways. So we've touched upon that, but it might be great. So put that in the chat. Our Te Tiaki Mana Tonga, our New Zealand group, we have webinars a bit sporadically at the moment because we run off a volunteer committee, but they do happen, so I can ensure that the invites go out. What I do want to acknowledge is George and Laura's contributions for kicking this off. They were sitting having a coffee, and I said, hey, this would be great to share with an Australian New Zealand audience. how do you two feel about doing a webinar? And they both graciously said yes, they committed to it. So I want to acknowledge both of you for your stories, for your sharing, and for kicking the session off. It would have been nothing without the both of you. And Laura, I just want to acknowledge you because you're coming in when you're very unwell. And so I want to acknowledge that. And we'll let you go off to bed very shortly and hopefully recover. But George and Laura, thank you so much. I think you've really added to the discussion, or started off as well and added. And to everyone for showing up. I think we've got a good balance of Australian and Kiwis with us today. So that's really nice. What I'm going to do post this, Hui, is I'm going to put the recording up and I'll share the link out in case any of you want to watch it again. More likely your colleagues that haven't been able to attend will be able to watch the recording if it's of use. I will go back through the meeting chat and just read what people have shared. But I would like to close this off with karakia. When we started, I said I'd explain what a karakia was for our Australian colleagues and perhaps our New Zealand colleagues who aren't so familiar with it. It's just the way here we acknowledge our role in Te Tiriti o Waitangi for Māori to start off and close with, they say like an opening prayer, but it's an opening acknowledgement, a clearing of waters, a way of coming together for this hui. And then as we close, having one that sends us on our ways so that we that we're going off on a nice note. So I'm just going to, I don't even think I'm sharing my screen at the moment. Bear with me. I should know how to work tech. I've been doing it for years, but sometimes it just fails me. Anyway, here we go. So I'm just going to close with whakatakati ho, and you can see the translation there to the side. Whakatakati ho ki te uru, whakatakati ho ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hohu, ti he Māori ora. Kia ora everyone. Thank you again. Have great rest of your days. And again, special thanks to George and Laura for your preparation and sharing with us today. I really do appreciate it. Ngā mihi, go well everyone.
Paki te koutou.